Welcome to our sleep video series, your easiest path to drifting off naturally. These videos are designed to gently guide your mind toward rest. They work in a few simple ways. First, we give your mind something lightly engaging to focus on, not too exciting, not too dull. Just enough to keep your thoughts from wandering, but not enough to keep you awake. Next, through our proprietary neuro-relaxation technique, the pacing of the audio gradually slows as the video progresses. This subtle change encourages your mind to slow with it. The slowdown doesn't happen in a straight line. It follows carefully crafted patterns proven to support deeper relaxation. Finally, every element of the audio is intentionally calm, steady, and pleasantly boring, perfect for helping your mind settle into sleep. Before we begin, I encourage you to subscribe so you always have a new video ready for bedtime. And in return for these videos, we ask just one small favor. Please like the video and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, your city, state, or country, and what time it is for you. It motivates our team, helps us understand what's working, and builds a worldwide community of people who fall asleep together each night. It's always inspiring to see how others use these videos. Now, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let yourself unwind.
The first time Tom mentioned California, he didn't say it like a place. He said it like a prayer. He was sitting at our kitchen table in Boston, the Boston transcript spread out before him, his coffee gone cold in the cup. It was a rainy Tuesday in November of 1848, and the gray light filtering through the window made the ink on the page look stark and accusing. "Eliza," he whispered, dragging a finger across a headline. "Look at this. Look at what they're saying." I came over, wiping flour from my hands onto my apron. Life then was measured in flour and coffee, in mending shirts and Sunday visits to my mother's parlor. It was a small life, neat and hemmed, and I loved the predictability of it. "Gold," Tom said, looking up at me. His eyes were blue, a startling, clear blue that usually softened when he looked at me. But that day, they were hard, glittering with a fever I didn't recognize. "Nuggets the size of walnuts, Eliza, sitting in the riverbeds. Men are pulling out fortunes before breakfast." "Newspapers exaggerate, Tom," I said, dismissing it with a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Remember the time they said the harbor had frozen solid and it was just slush?" "This isn't slush," he said, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floorboards, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "This is destiny. President Polk confirmed it. It's real. And if we don't go now, we'll be the only fools left in Massachusetts watching the rain while the rest of the world gets rich." "We?" I asked. The word hung in the air between us, heavier than the cast-iron skillet on the stove. Tom came to me then, taking my face in his hands. His palms were warm, calloused from his work at the mill, hands I knew better than my own. "I can't go without you, Lisa, you know that. A man alone out there. The stories say it's wild. No laws, no churches. Men forget who they are. I need you to keep me. Me. Besides, who would cook my beans?" He tried to smile, to make it a joke, but I saw the desperation under it. He wasn't asking me to come for my sake. He was asking me to come as his anchor. He wanted to tie himself to the mast of our marriage so the siren song of the gold fields wouldn't drown him. The fights that followed were ugly things, sharp and jagged. My mother wept in her sitting room, clutching her handkerchief until her knuckles were white. "You cannot take her to a wilderness, Thomas," she shouted, her voice cracking. "She is delicate. She has never slept outside a house in her life. There are savages. There is cholera. You are signing her death warrant." "I am signing her fortune," Tom shouted back, pacing the rug. "Do you want her to stay here and be the wife of a miller forever, counting pennies for flour? I can give her a palace in San Francisco. Silk dresses. Chinaware that isn't chipped." "I don't want a palace, Tom," I whispered from the corner. "I just want you." "Then come with me," he said, turning to me pleading. "Prove it." And that was the lever he used to pry me from my life. Loyalty. It is a terrible, heavy thing for a wife to carry. In 1849, a wife's place was with her husband, even if his place was nowhere. The weeks that followed were a blur of dismantling a life. We sold the furniture. My mother's dining table, the one where we had eaten our wedding breakfast, went to a neighbor for $4. The rocking chair I had imagined nursing a baby in one day was bartered for 50 pounds of bacon. Every object sold felt like peeling a layer of skin. We packed the wagon. It wasn't one of the Conestoga schooners the big outfits used. It was a smaller farm wagon, reinforced with iron bands Tom had forged himself. It looked sturdy in the Boston streets. It looked pitifully fragile once we hit the endless expanse of the prairie months later. Saying goodbye was a quiet kind of dying. My mother hugged me on the porch, her scent of lavender and starch so familiar it made my throat close. She pressed a small Bible into my hand. "Read it," she whispered, "and pray that he finds his gold quickly so you can come home." "I will, Mamas." "You look pale, Eliza," she noted, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "Are you eating?" "Nerves," I said, "just nerves." We left in April. The journey to Independence, Missouri, was by rail and riverboat, civilized enough to lull me into a false sense of security. But Independence was the end of the world as I knew it. It was a chaotic, muddy staging ground for thousands of dreamers. Men in red flannel shirts shouted at oxen. Women in sunbonnets looked at each other with wide, fearful eyes, recognizing the same terror reflected back. We joined a wagon train, 30 families bound together by nothing but destination and fear. The wagon master was a grim man named Jebediah who chewed tobacco and looked at the western horizon like it was an enemy he intended to kill. The first week on the trail was almost romantic. The grass was green, the air was sweet, and Tom was happier than I had seen him in years. He walked beside the oxen, whistling, cracking the whip not to hit them, but just to hear the sound. At night, the campfires looked like fallen stars scattered across the plains. But romance dies quickly when you are walking 15 miles a day in skirts that collect dust like a sponge. The Platte River was the first thief of our dignity. It was wide, shallow, and thick with mud. We couldn't ferry, we had to ford. "Skirt up, Eliza," Tom shouted over the roar of the water. "You have to walk, the wagon is too heavy." I hiked my skirts to my waist, mortified as the men shouted instructions and stepped into the water. It was freezing. The current tugged at my boots, trying to pull me under. The silt filled my shoes, grinding against my skin. I watched our wagon, our home, tip precariously as the oxen stumbled. A barrel of flour, our winter survival, slid dangerously near the edge. "Grab it," Jebediah screamed. Tom lunged, catching the barrel, his face contorted with strain. He saved the flour, but he wrenched his back. For 3 days, he couldn't walk upright. I had to drive the oxen. Have you ever driven oxen? They are stubborn, lumbering beasts who do not care about your schedule or your fatigue. My hands blistered against the reins. The sun beat down, unrelenting, burning the back of my neck until it peeled. I learned new words, harsh words I never thought would cross my lips, just to get them moving. Then came the sickness. It wasn't Indians or wolves that we feared most. It was the invisible killer. Cholera. It moved through the wagon train like a shadow. One morning, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had shared her sourdough starter with me, didn't come out of her tent. By noon, she was dead. We buried her in a shallow grave by the trailside. We couldn't stop long. Stopping meant falling behind. Stopping meant winter in the mountains. So we threw dirt over her, said a prayer, and the wheels rolled over her shadow. "Don't look back, Eliza," Tom said, gripping my arm as I stared at the fresh mound of earth. "She's with God. We have to keep moving." "She had 3 children, Tom," I whispered. "Who will braid their hair?" "The oldest girl will do it. Life goes on." His hardness frightened me. The gold fever was burning away his empathy. He looked at the horizon with a hunger that made everything else, death, pain, sorrow, seem like mere inconveniences. My own body began to rebel. At first, I thought it was the bad water or the salt pork. A persistent nausea settled in my stomach, roiling like the muddy river. Mornings were the worst. I would wake up in the wagon, the canvas stifling even in the dawn chill, and have to scramble out to retch into the sagebrush. "You're weak, Liza," Tom said one morning, handing me a tin cup of water. "You need to eat more hardtack." "It's hard to eat when the world is spinning," I snapped, wiping my mouth. I didn't tell him my suspicion. I couldn't. Not here. Not when we were 1,000 miles from a doctor, 1,000 miles from a mother. To be with child on the trail was a sentence of terror. I counted the days on a notch in the wagon wood, praying I was wrong. As we crossed into the high desert, the landscape stripped itself of comfort. No trees, just endless sage and dust. The alkali water poisoned the oxen if you weren't careful. The dust was a physical presence. It was in our food, in our clothes, in the creases of our eyelids. I breathed dust. I tasted it. I felt I was becoming dust. We encountered others. The trail was a crowded highway of misery. We passed abandoned furniture, grand pianos left to rot in the sun, chests of drawers with the drawers pulled out, spilled china shattered on the rocks. It was a graveyard of domestic hopes. One evening, near Independence Rock, a group of men rode into our camp. They weren't emigrants. They were rougher. Their eyes shifted too quickly. "Claim jumpers," Jebediah muttered, hand on his rifle. They asked for coffee. We gave it to them because you don't refuse men with that many guns. One of them, a man with a scar through his eyebrow, looked at Tom. "Heading to the diggings?" he asked, his voice like grating stones. "The American River," Tom said, standing tall though he looked thin bordering on gaunt. "Going to stake a claim." "Better hurry," the man laughed, a darker sound than the night wind. "The good spots are gone, and what's left? Well, a man has to be willing to bleed for it." He looked at me then. It wasn't a look of desire but of appraisal, like I was a horse that probably wouldn't survive the winter. "Pretty thing for a mining camp," he sneered. "Hope she can shoot." Tom bristled, stepping forward, but I put a hand on his arm. "Tom, don't." When they rode off, Tom was shaking, not from fear but from rage. "I should have killed him," he muttered, "looking at you like that." "And leave me a widow in the desert?" I asked quietly. "Swallow your pride, Tom. We can't afford it. It weighs too much." The mountains loomed ahead, the Sierra Nevada. They were beautiful and terrifying, jagged teeth biting into the sky. We had heard the stories of the Donner Party just 3 years before. We knew what snow could do. The pace quickened. The animals were failing. We had to lighten the load again. "The books have to go, Eliza," Tom said, pulling my crate of literature from the wagon bed. "Not the books, Tom, please. It's my only escape." "It's 50 pounds of dead weight. Do you want the oxen to die on the pass?" He dumped them. My Dickens, my poets, my Bible commentary. He left them in a pile by a dry creek bed. I watched them recede as we rolled away, feeling like I was leaving pieces of my mind behind. That night, camped at the base of the pass, the air thin and cold, I sat by the fire. Tom was asleep, exhausted, twitching in his dreams. I looked at my hands. They were red, cracked, the nails broken. These were not the hands of Eliza, the miller's daughter. These were the hands of a stranger. My stomach churned again. I placed a hand over my abdomen. It felt firm, different. I looked up at the peaks, shrouded in clouds. Somewhere over that wall of stone was California, the land of gold, the land of milk and honey. But from here, it just looked like a fortress designed to keep out the weak. "I should have stayed," I whispered to the fire. "I should have let him go." But looking at Tom's sleeping face, lined with dust and new wrinkles, I knew I couldn't have. He was a child chasing a dragon. Without me, the fire would consume him. But who, I wondered, as the first snowflake drifted down from the dark sky, would save me from the fire? The wind howled through the canyon, sounding like a chorus of women weeping. I pulled my shawl tighter, shivered, and closed my eyes, waiting for the dawn that would bring the climb. The summit of the Sierra Nevada was not a triumphant gate. It was a precipice. We looked down from the spine of the world into a vast, hazy trough that we were told was the Sacramento Valley. The descent was worse than the climb. We practically slid the wagon down slopes of loose shale, the wheels locked with chains, the oxen bellowing in panic. When we finally rolled into the foothills, the air changed. It grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine pitch and something sharper, sulfur, perhaps, or human desperation. We followed the river, the American, which Tom had spoken of as a ribbon of purity. It was brown. Choked with silt from 1,000 sluice boxes upstream, it looked less like a river of life and more like an open wound bleeding mud. We arrived at the camp known as Hangtown, a name that should have sent us running back to the snow just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. My first sight of our new home was a shock that stole the breath from my lungs. It was chaos manifest. Tents of dirty canvas huddled together like frightened sheep. Shanties built of packing crates and scrap lumber leaned precariously over the muddy track that served as a main street. And the noise, God, the noise, it was a cacophony of languages, English, Spanish, French, Chinese, all shouting, swearing, bargaining. Hammers rang on anvils. Fiddles screeched from 3 different canvas saloons, each playing a different tune in a competition of discord. "We're here, Eliza," Tom shouted, his eyes wide and wild, scanning the crowded riverbank. "Look at the energy, you can feel it." I felt it all right. It felt like walking into a brawl. Men swarmed everywhere, thousands of them, and among that sea of flannel shirts and slouch hats I saw, no one like me. I was a speck of calico in a world of denim. As our wagon creaked down the street, heads turned. Silence rippled outward like a wave. Eyes, hungry, lonely, feral eyes, tracked us. "Tom," I whispered, shrinking against the wagon seat. "They're staring." "They're just admirin', honey," he said, oblivious. "You're the first decent woman some of them have seen in 6 months." We pitched our tent on a scrap of rocky ground up the hill from the main chaos, near a stand of scrub oaks. It wasn't a home, it was a shelter. Tom barely helped me drive the stakes before he grabbed his pan. "Sun's not down yet, Eliza," he said, practically vibrate with impatience. "I'm going to test the creek, just for an hour." "Tom, we have no firewood, no water." "You'll manage, you're a pioneer now." And he ran. He actually ran toward the muddy water, leaving me alone with a canvas sheet and a mule that looked as defeated as I felt. That first night, I huddled under a quilt, listening to the camp below. Gunshots popped like firecrackers, 1, 2, then a volley. Drunken shouts echoed off the canyon walls. It sounded like hell with the lid off. I kept a butcher knife under my pillow, my hand cramping around the handle. Morning brought no relief, only clarity. The camp was a sty. There was no sanitation. The stench of unwashed bodies, rotting garbage, and the latrine trenches dug too close to the tents hung in the stagnant air. I was trying to coax a fire from damp kindling when a shadow fell over me. I jumped, brandishing a stick. "Easy, child," a voice rasped. It was a woman, older, maybe 50, but looking 70. Her skin was the texture of dried tobacco leaf, and she wore a dress made from flour sacks. Her eyes, though, were sharp and kind. "I'm Sarah," she said, holding out a tin of biscuits. "Saw you roll in, figured you hadn't had time to bake." "Thank you," I stammered, taking the tin. "I'm Eliza." "Welcome to the diggings, Eliza," she snorted, looking around at my pitiful setup. "Don't get comfortable. Nothing stays put here long." Sarah became my lifeline. She was a widow. Her husband had died of dysentery 2 weeks after arrival. She stayed because she had nowhere to go and made a living washing shirts for the miners at $1 apiece. "Stay away from the El Dorado Saloon," she warned me as we walked to the creek to fetch water. "And steer clear of Big Jack's claim down by the bend. He's a mean one. Shoots first, asks questions never." I saw Big Jack later that week. He was a mountain of a man with a beard like a blackened thicket. He was dragging a Chinese miner by the queue, shouting about claim jumping. No one intervened. The law here was the gun on your hip. I turned away, sick to my stomach, and hurried back to my tent. My routine settled into a grueling rhythm. While Tom spent 12 hours a day knee-deep in freezing water, shaking a pan until his shoulders locked, I fought the elements. Cooking was a battle. Flour was $50 a barrel. Eggs were $3 each. I learned to trade. I traded mending for onions. I traded a smile, just a polite, distant smile, for a cup of sugar from the storekeeper. But the hardest battle was inside me. I hadn't bled since the Platte River. My waist was thickening, subtle but undeniable. The nausea I had blamed on the trail didn't leave, it changed. It became a deep, twisting cramp that struck at odd hours. One afternoon, retching behind the tent, Sarah found me. "You're breeding, aren't you?" she asked, not unkindly. I wiped my mouth, leaning against a tree, trembling. "I think so, yes." Sarah sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. "This is no place for a baby, Eliza. There's no doctor. The nearest Sawbones is a drunk in Sacramento, 2 days ridin'." "I know," I whispered. "I'm terrified, Sarah. What if something goes wrong?" "We make do with herbs," she said, pulling a pouch from her pocket. "Raspberry leaf tea, ginger root. I can show you the plants to forage, but you need rest. You look peaked." Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. Tom came home each night exhausted, wet, and often empty-handed. The nuggets the newspapers promised were dust. Flakes, just enough to buy beans and keep the fever burning. "Tomorrow, Lisa," he'd say, staring into the fire, his eyes hollow. "I found a trace near the quartz outcrop. Tomorrow is the big strike." He didn't notice my pale face. He didn't ask why I wasn't eating. He was consumed. The camp grew rougher as more men arrived, and the gold grew scarcer. Frustration boiled over into violence. Claim jumping became an epidemic. One evening, while Tom was down at the creek, a man stumbled into our campsite. He reeked of whiskey and sour sweat. He wasn't much older than Tom, but his eyes were vacant, glassy. "Hey there, pretty bird," he slurred, swaying. "Where's your man?" "He's close," I said, backing toward the fire, reaching for the iron skillet. "You best move on." "Aw, don't be like that," he lunged, grabbing my wrist. His grip was wet and strong. "Just want a little company. It's lonely out here." "Let go," I screamed, swinging the skillet. It connected with his shoulder with a dull thud. He yelled, releasing me, and stumbled back. "You witch," he snarled, raising a fist. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Dirt kicked up near the man's boot. "Next one takes your ear off," Sarah's voice rang out. She stood by her tent, a long rifle leveled at him. The drunk cursed, spat on the ground, and retreated into the darkness. I dropped the skillet, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. When Tom came home an hour later, I was still trembling. "What happened?" he asked, seeing the skillet in the dirt. "A man," I choked out. "He tried to." Sarah chased him off. Tom's face darkened. He grabbed his pistol. "Which way?" "No, Tom, please, don't leave me alone again, just stay." He stopped, looking at me, really looking at me for the first time in weeks. He saw the terror. He saw the swell of my belly beneath my apron. "Eliza," he whispered, "are you?" "Yes," I sobbed. "And I am scared, Tom, I am so scared." He held me that night, crying into my hair, promising we'd leave. Promising that as soon as he hit the pocket, just one good pocket, we'd go to San Francisco. We'd get a hotel, a doctor. But morning came, and the fever took him again. "One more week," he said, kissing my forehead. "Just one more week." A week turned into a month. The rains came. The camp turned into a bog of mud that sucked the boots off your feet. Dysentery swept through the tents again. The screams of sick men echoed in the night. Then the cramps changed. It was a Tuesday. I was scrubbing Tom's shirt in a bucket of rainwater. A pain, sharp and hot, sliced through my abdomen. It wasn't a normal ache. It felt like something tearing. I dropped the shirt. I doubled over, gasping. "Sarah," I tried to call, but my voice was a whisper. I crawled into the tent, curling onto the pallet. The pain came in waves. This wasn't labor. It was too early. I was only 5 months along. This was something wrong. I lay there for hours, sweating, the world narrowing to the point of pain in my belly. I heard the sounds of the camp outside, the clink of pickaxes, the braying of mules, the laughter of men gambling their lives away. They sounded 1,000,000 miles away. Sarah found me at dusk. She took one look at my face and set her jaw. "Boil water," she shouted to no one, then realized she was alone. She busied herself, heating rocks, making poultices. "Is the baby coming?" I asked, gripping her hand until my nails dug in. "Something's coming, child," she said grimly. "We just have to pray it's not the end of you." Tom wasn't there. He was up at Big Jack's claim, arguing about water rights. A riot was brewing down in the ravine. I could hear the angry shouts rising like steam. "He shouldn't be there," I moaned. "He should be here." "Men are fools, Eliza," Sarah said, wiping my forehead with a cool rag. "They chase the shiny things and leave the real treasure to rust." As the night deepened, the pain became a white-hot blinding light. I whispered to the canvas ceiling, to the God my mother had promised watched over me. "Don't let me die here," I pleaded. "Not in the mud, not like this." Outside, a gunfight erupted in the street. Screams of men, the shattering of glass, the chaos of the gold rush, the roaring, uncaring beast of greed raged on. And inside the flimsy tent, alone in the most crowded place on earth, I prepared to fight a battle no newspaper would ever report. My vision blurred. The last thing I saw was Sarah's worried face, illuminated by a flickering candle, and the shadow of the tent flap fluttering in the wind, looking like a dark wing beat against the stars. "Tom," I whispered into the dark, "Tom." But the only answer was the river, rushing blindly to the sea. The pain subsided, retreating like a tide, but it left behind a wreckage of fear. I did not lose the baby that night. The bleeding stopped, Sarah's poultices did their work, and I was left weak, trembling, but still carrying the life inside me. But the camp itself seemed to fester. As the weeks turned into months, the energy of the place shifted from manic hope to a sullen, grinding desperation. The river was not yielding its secrets easily. For every man who pulled a walnut-sized nugget from the silt, 100 others pulled only aching backs and ruined boots. Tom was one of the 100. He changed. The optimism that had been his defining trait, the bright-eyed enthusiasm that had charmed me in Boston, curdled. He came back to the tent later each night, smelling of cheap whiskey and damp wool. He stopped talking about the palace in San Francisco. He stopped talking about the future at all. "Nothing in the pan, Eliza," he would say, collapsing onto his pallet without removing his boots. "Just black sand, always just black sand." "Maybe you should work for wages, Tom," I suggested one evening, stirring a pot of watery bean soup. "The shopkeepers are hiring, $5 a day." He looked at me as if I had slapped him. "Wages? I didn't cross a continent to be a clerk. I came to be a king." "We are living like paupers, Tom," I snapped, my patience fraying thin. "Look at me. My ankles are swollen to the size of melons. I have to scavenge for dandelion greens to keep the scurvy away. The water is poison. This baby needs more than dreams." He turned his back to me. "It takes time. You have no faith." Faith was a hard thing to keep when you were watching the world rot around you. The camp was a petri dish of human misery. Camp fever, typhus, likely swept through the tents with the regularity of the mail coach. I watched men waste away, turning yellow and gaunt, dying alone on dirty blankets while their partners argued over their boots. I joined a silent sorority of women. There were only a handful of us: Sarah, a German woman named Marta who washed clothes until her hands were raw meat, and a young girl named Clara who had arrived with her father only to bury him a week later. We met by the creek, washing our rags in the same muddy water the miners fouled upstream. We spoke in hushed tones, our voices lowered so the men wouldn't hear the truth of our lives. "Mrs. Gable lost hers last night," Marta whispered, wringing out a gray shirt. 4 months along just slipped away. "It's the water," Sarah said, spitting into the mud. "Full of mercury and death. You boil it, Eliza. You boil every drop." "I boil it until the pot runs dry," I said, rubbing my aching lower back. "But you can't boil the air." The violence escalated. It wasn't just fistfights anymore. It was a war of attrition. Claim jumping became a blood sport. I saw things no woman should see. One afternoon, while gathering firewood near the edge of the camp, I heard shouting. A mob had gathered near the large oak tree that gave Hangtown its name. I should have turned away. I should have run. But a morbid curiosity, or perhaps just the freezing terror of recognition, held me. They were dragging a man. He was young, barely 20, his face a mask of blood and terror. They said he stole a pouch of dust. Maybe he did. Maybe he was just hungry. It didn't matter. I watched, hand over my mouth, as they threw a rope over a sturdy branch. There was no trial, no judge, just the angry, braying verdict of the mob. They hoisted him up. He kicked, a desperate, spastic dance against the indifferent blue sky, until he stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. The men dispersed, returning to their whiskey and their cards, leaving the body swaying in the gentle breeze like a grim pendulum, marking the time of our descent into savagery. I ran back to the tent and vomited until there was nothing left. When I told Tom, he just shrugged, cleaning his pistol. "Justice is swift here, Eliza. Don't steal and you won't swing." "That isn't justice, Tom. That's murder." "It's the law of the camp. You wanted civilization. You should have stayed in Boston." "I wanted you to stay in Boston," I screamed, throwing a tin cup at him. It bounced harmlessly off his shoulder, but the anger behind it hung in the air. Then came the gangs. Big Jack wasn't just a bully anymore, he was a warlord. He had a crew of men, roughnecks who had given up digging to prey on those who were still trying. They moved through the camp like sharks, charging protection fees. They came to our tent one evening, while Tom was eating. "Evening, Thomas," Big Jack rumbled, standing in the entrance, blocking out the fading light. He smelled of stale tobacco and menace. "Jack," Tom said, standing up slowly, his hand drifting toward his belt. "We're collectin' for the Benevolent Association," Jack grinned, showing a mouth full of gold teeth that probably didn't belong to him originally. 2 ounces a week. Keeps the claim safe. Keeps the little lady safe." His eyes flicked to me. I was sitting on the bedroll, sewing a patch onto Tom's trousers. I froze. The look in his eyes was the same one the claim jumpers had on the trail, a look that reduced me to an object, a spoil of war. "I don't have 2 ounces, Tom said, his voice tight. "The creek is dry." "Find it," Jack said, his grin vanishing. "Or maybe we take payment in trade." He lingered on me for a second too long, before turning and walking away into the night. Tom sank onto a crate, burying his face in his hands. "We have to leave, Tom," I whispered. "Please, before they come back." "I can't leave," he exploded, standing up and kicking the fire pit, sending sparks flying. "I have nothing. If we go back now, I am a failure. I am a beggar. Do you want our child to be the son of a beggar?" "I want our child to have a father who is alive," I cried. "I want a mother who isn't terrified every time the wind blows the tent flap." "One more week," he said again, the refrain of the damned. "I heard about a strike up the North Fork, just 1 more week." But the baby didn't care about his weeks. The spotting started again in the 7th month. It wasn't much, just a warning. A streak of red on white linen. But the pain came with it, a dull, rhythmic tightening that felt like a giant hand squeezing my insides. I couldn't hide it this time. Sarah was gone to Sacramento to buy supplies and hadn't returned. I was alone with the men. "Tom," I woke him, shaking his shoulder. It was midnight. The camp was relatively quiet, save for the howling of a coyote in the distance. "Tom, something is wrong." He woke groggily. "What, the baby?" Pain, bad pain, and blood. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his gold fever. "What do we do? Is there a midwife?" "No midwife," I gasped as a contraction rolled through me. "There's a surgeon, Dr. Miller, in the big tent near the assay office." "He's a drunk," Tom said, pulling on his boots with trembling hands. "He's all we have. Go, please." He ran into the night. I lay there, clutching my belly, talking to the child inside. "Stay," I whispered. "It's not time. The world isn't ready for you. I'm not ready for you." I felt a kick, a strong, defiant thud against my ribs. It was a spark of life in the darkness, a reminder that despite the mud, the death, and the fear, life insisted on continuing. I cried then, tears of rage and love mixing on my dirty cheeks. I hated this place. I hated the gold. But I loved this tiny, kicking thing with a fierceness that frightened me. Tom returned an hour later, dragging a man by the collar. Dr. Miller did smell of whiskey, a profound, soaked-in stench of bourbon, but his eyes were somewhat focused. He looked at me, looked at the blood, and shook his head. "Threatened labor," he slurred. "She needs laudanum and bed rest, absolute stillness." "Give her the laudanum," Tom demanded. "Costs money, friend," the doctor held out a shaking hand. "Medicine isn't free, 4 ounces. 4 ounces, Tom roared. "That's robbery." "That's supply and demand," the doctor said flatly. Tom frantically searched his pockets, turning them inside out. He pulled out a small leather pouch, he shook it. A pitiful amount of dust fell into his hand, maybe half an ounce. "It's all I have," Tom pleaded. "Take it, please." The doctor looked at the dust, then at me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of humanity in his bloodshot eyes. Or maybe he just didn't want to be punched by a desperate husband. "Fine," he grumbled, taking the dust. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small vial. 10 drops, no more. If she sleeps, the labor might stop. I took the bitter liquid. The world softened. The sharp edges of the pain dulled. I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of Boston. I dreamed of clean sheets. Of rain that washed things clean instead of turning them to mud. I dreamed of my mother's tea set, pristine and unbroken. But I woke to the sound of thunder. It wasn't a dream. A storm had broken over the Sierra, and this wasn't a gentle rain, it was a deluge. The sky had opened up to drown us all. Rain hammered against the canvas tent like buckshot. The wind whipped the fabric, making it snap and pop. "Tom," I called out. He was by the entrance, frantically digging a trench with a shovel. "Water's rising, Liza. The creek is over the banks." I tried to sit up, but the pressure in my belly was immense. The laudanum had worn off. The contractions were back, and they were harder. Angry. "I can't move, Tom." "You have to, the floor is flooding." I looked down. A stream of muddy water was seeping under the tent wall, soaking the rug, inching toward my palate. Tom abandoned the trench. He rushed to me, grabbing my arms. "We have to get to higher ground, to the rocky shelf." He hauled me up. I screamed as a pain ripped through me, doubling me over. "I can't walk." "I'll carry you." He scooped me up. He was thinner than he had been in Boston, his muscles stringy from starvation, but terror gave him strength. He kicked open the tent flap. The world outside was an apocalypse of water and mud. The street was a river. Tents were washing away, their occupants screaming as they chased their belongings downstream. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chaos in stark, strobe light bursts. Tom staggered through the mud, slipping, sliding, holding me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his wet shirt, smelling the rain and his fear. Almost there, he shouted over the roar of the storm. He scrambled up a slippery embankment toward a cluster of boulders that offered some shelter. He set me down on a flat rock, under an overhang that provided a meager shield from the rain. "Stay here," he yelled. "I'm going back for the blankets, for the food." "No," I grabbed his hand. "Don't leave me the baby. Tom, the baby is coming now." He looked at me, looked at the swirling floodwaters below where our tent, and everything we owned, was slowly collapsing into the mud. He looked back at my face, contorted in agony. He made his choice. He let go of the past. He let go of the gold. "Okay," he knelt beside me, taking my hand. "Okay, Liza, I'm here, I'm here." Another contraction hit, and I threw my head back and screamed into the storm. My voice joined the thunder, a primal sound of defiance against the indifference of the wild. I was wet, cold, starving, and about to bring a life into a world that seemed determined to kill us. But as I looked into Tom's eyes, finally clear, finally seeing only me, I gripped his hand and pushed. The taste of metal, blood from biting my lip, filled my mouth. The smell of ozone and mud filled my nose. And the terrifying, undeniable knowledge that this was the moment of truth, life or death, here on a rock in the rain, filled my soul. "Push, Eliza," Tom cried, tears streaming down his face. "Push." And so, with the storm raging around us, I fought the final battle. The storm was not a weather event, it was a judgment. The sky cracked open like a ruined ceiling, pouring down sheets of water so cold they felt like ice shards against my skin. Huddled under the rock overhang, I was no longer Eliza the miller's daughter. I was an animal in a trap, reduced to the raw, bloody mechanics of biology. "Tom," I screamed, but the wind snatched the name from my lips and threw it into the ravine. He was there, kneeling in the mud next to me, his face pale as death in the lightning flashes. He held my hand, but his grip was slippery with rain and sweat. He looked terrified. Useless. A man who could shoe an ox or build a sluice box but was utterly unmanned by the violence of birth. "Is it coming?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "It's tearing me apart," I sobbed, arching my back as another wave of pain crashed through me. This wasn't the rhythmic contraction of a healthy labor. This was a continuous, serrated agony. It felt as though the child was fighting its way out with claws. Then, through the curtain of rain, a shape emerged, a specter in sodden gray. "Sarah," Tom yelled, relief flooding his voice. It was Sarah. She hadn't gone to Sacramento, or perhaps she had returned just to save me. She scrambled up the slick rocks, her skirts heavy with mud, clutching a leather bag. Her face was set in a grim line, her eyes hard and focused. "Move, you fool," she shouted at Tom, shoving him aside. She dropped to her knees beside me, the wet stones scraping her skin. "Eliza, look at me, look at me." I focused on her eyes. They were the only steady thing in a spinning world. "It's too soon, Sarah," I gasped. "He's too small." "Small ones are fighters," she said fierce, her hands moving quickly. She pulled a flask from her pocket, whiskey, and forced it to my lips. "Drink. It won't stop the pain, but it'll make you care less about it." I choked down the burning liquid. It seared my throat, but warmed the cold pit of my stomach. Below us, the camp was dying. The roar of the river had become a monstrous, churning sound. Through the darkness, I could hear the crack snap of timbers breaking as shanties were swept away. Men were screaming, hoarse, desperate shouts for help that went unanswered. I saw a lantern bobbing in the torrent, a tiny star drowning in the dark before it winked out. "Focus on the pain, Eliza," Sarah commanded, pressing her hands on my abdomen. "The rest of the world can drown. You have to bring this boy into the mud." "Is it a boy?" I whispered deliriously. "Feels like a boy, kicks like a mule. Now when the next one comes, you push until your eyes bleed. You hear me?" I nodded. The pain came. It started in my spine, a hot iron rod twisting and wrapped around my hips. I bore down using the rock behind me as leverage. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore my throat. Tom was hovering behind Sarah, useless, holding a lantern he had managed to keep lit. The light threw wild, dancing shadows against the rock wall, monsters reaching for us. "He's crowning," Sarah shouted. "I see the head, tiny. God, he's tiny. One more, Eliza, give me everything." I didn't have everything. I had nothing. I was hollowed out by months of starvation, by dysentery, by fear. But somewhere in the marrow of my bones, there was a reserve. A primal refusal to let this be the end. I pushed. I felt the tearing, a sharp, hot agony that made the world go white. "He's out," Sarah cried. Silence. I slumped back against the rock, panting, the rain mingling with the sweat on my face. I listened. I strained every nerve against the howling wind. No cry. "Sarah," I whispered. She was working frantically, rubbing the small, gray form with a rough piece of wool she had kept dry in her bag. She turned him over. She cleared his mouth with her finger. "Breathe, damn you," she hissed. "Breathe." Tom leaned in, his face a mask of horror. "Is it?" Then a sound, faint, like a kitten mewing in a storm. A cough, a sputter, and then a thin, high-pitched wail. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It cut through the thunder. It cut through the gunfire that had suddenly erupted down near the tree line, Big Jack's gang, looting the flooded tents, shooting those who resisted. The violence of men was loud, but the cry of my son was louder. "He's alive," Sarah breathed, wrapping him quickly in the dry wool and thrusting him into Tom's arms under his coat. "Keep him against your skin, Thomas. He needs heat. If he gets cold, he dies." Tom cradled the bundle, looking down at it with an expression of awe and terror. But the danger wasn't over. Sarah turned back to me. Her face went pale in the lantern light. "Eliza," she said, her voice tight, "you're bleeding too much." I looked down. The rainwater pooling around my hips was dark, crimson. "I'm cold, Sarah," I chattered, my teeth clicking together. "Postpartum hemorrhage," Sarah muttered. She grabbed the whiskey flask and poured the rest of it directly onto her hands, then onto a rag. "This is going to hurt." She pressed the rag hard against me. I cried out, weaker this time. "Tom," Sarah barked, "give me your belt." Tom, one-handed, unbuckled his leather belt and tossed it to her. She used it to bind the rags tight, cinching it around my hips with brutal force. "We have to stop the flow," she gritted out. "Stay with us, Eliza. Don't you dare close your eyes. You look at your son, look at him." I looked at Tom. He had pulled the blanket back slightly. I saw a tiny face. Red, wrinkled, eyes squeezed shut against the storm. He looked like an angry walnut. He looked like Tom. "William," I whispered. "His name is William." "William," Tom repeated, tears tracking through the dirt on his face. "A good name, a strong name." The bleeding slowed. The cold settled deep in my bones, but the darkness didn't take me. I hovered on the edge of consciousness, listening to the chaotic symphony of the gold rush night, the river destroying the dreams of men, the guns taking their lives, and the erratic, stubborn heartbeat of my son. Morning broke gray and desolate. The rain stopped, leaving a world washed of color. The camp was gone, just mud flats and debris. Bodies lay half-buried in the silt, mules, men, dreams. We survived on that rock ledge for 2 days. Sarah fed me broth she made from roots and dried beef she had scavenged. Tom held William, becoming a human furnace for the boy. When the waters receded, the reality set in. "We have nothing," Tom said, looking down at the empty spot where our tent had been. "The wagon, the tools, the gold, it's all gone." "We have William," I rasped, my voice a ghost of itself, "and we are alive." But the cost was coming due. Sarah fell ill the 3rd day. It wasn't the flood, it was the camp fever she had fought off for months. Her resilience finally snapped. She lay on the rock, shivering, her skin burning. "Go," she whispered to me as I tried to cool her forehead with a wet rag. "Take the boy. Get out of this hellhole." "I won't leave you, Sarah." "You have to," she coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I'm done, Eliza, my claim is played out, but yours is just starting." She died at sunset. There was no coffin. Tom dug a grave in the soft, wet earth beneath a pine tree. We wrapped her in the blanket she had used to warm my son. I placed a smooth river stone on the mound. It was the only monument she would get. A woman who saved 3 lives and was owed a cathedral buried in the mud of a lawless canyon. "Thank you," I whispered to the dirt. "Thank you." Tom stood up, leaning on the shovel. He looked older. The boyish hunger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, scarring hauntedness. He looked at the grave, then at the devastation of the camp, then at me holding William. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "Tom." "I was wrong," he repeated, his voice breaking. "There is no gold here, Eliza, only ghosts. I almost killed you. I almost killed him. For what? For dust." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small pouch, the one Dr. Miller had taken most of, but returned a pinch of. He opened it. He let the golden flakes drift out, catching the dying light as they fluttered into the mud. "We're going home," he said. The journey back was not a triumph. It was a retreat. We walked. We had no wagon. We traded Tom's pistol for a mule to carry me and the baby. We joined a group of returnees. broken men heading back to the coast, eyes fixed on the ground, shame heavy on their shoulders. San Francisco was a nightmare of mud and noise, but to me, it was heaven because it had a ship. We spent our last coins on steerage passage to Panama. As the ship pulled away from the wharf, I stood at the railing, William wrapped in a shawl against my chest. The Golden Gate, not yet a bridge, just a gap in the hills, receded into the fog. I looked at the other women on the deck. There were so few of us. I saw a girl, no older than 20, missing an arm. I saw a matron with eyes so empty they looked like windows into a burnt-out house. We exchanged nods. We were the veterans, the survivors of a war no one named. The voyage home was long. I nursed William, watching him grow stronger as I slowly healed. The phantom pains in my hips never fully left. The scars on my spirit never faded. We settled back in Massachusetts. Tom went back to the mill. He worked hard, quieter now, a man who didn't look at the horizon anymore. He looked at his hands. He looked at his son. People asked me about the adventure. "Oh, Eliza," my cousins would chirp at Sunday tea, their eyes wide. "Was it romantic? Did you see nuggets as big as eggs? Was it wild and free?" I would smile, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was. I would pause, remembering the smell of blood and rain, the sound of the rope snapping tight on the hanging tree, the feel of Sarah's rough hands saving my life. It was an education. I never told them the truth. I never told them about the women buried in unmarked graves along the Platte. I never told them about the fear that tasted like copper in your mouth every single morning. I never told them that the reality of being a gold rush wife was an adventure. It was rapid aging. It was loneliness so deep it echoed. It was being the disposable infrastructure upon which men built their delusions. Tonight, as I sit here by a safe, warm fire in a house that does not move, I look at William. He is 5 now. He has Tom's eyes but Sarah's chin. He is playing with a wooden block. Sometimes, when the wind howls around the eaves in winter, I wake up sweating, reaching for a knife that isn't there. I smell the sulfur of the camp. I hear the river rising. Tom turns in his sleep and acts as if the year 1849 never happened. But I remember. I remember that we didn't find gold. We found something harder, colder, and infinitely more durable. We found the limit of what a human soul can endure, and we found the strength to walk back from the edge. I pick up William, holding him tight, smelling the soap in his hair. Clean, safe soap. "Mama," he asks, "why are you squeezing me?" "Just testing, my love," I whisper, kissing his head. "Just making sure you're real." And that truly is the only gold I ever needed. End of recording.